Good morning, everyone. I'm Superintendent Stathis. I'm a member of the Board of Directors here at the Museum of Fire. And on behalf of the Board, our CEO, the staff, and of course our volunteers, I bid you a most warm and sincere welcome to our museum this morning. I've got the pleasure of being the host for this morning's proceedings. Before I proceed further, I think it's appropriate that we firstly acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians, I should say, of the land that we're on today, the Darug people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. Today marks the beginning of History Week, and this is the first of a number of events that we're planning to hold here at the museum over the course of the coming week. This is the first time a presentation of this kind has been held at the museum, and we hope that it is the beginning of a practice that will extend well into the future. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to restrict numbers that can be with us here this morning, but we are live streaming the event, and at the end of the proceedings today, those who are here and those who are watching via live stream will be able to post questions to the panel, which we'll be pleased to answer. Belinda McMartin holds a Master of Arts in Museum Studies and a Bachelor of Arts with honours in History and Heritage with the University of Sydney, and she's also our recently appointed CEO. In 2010, Belinda completed her history honours thesis at the University of Sydney on the theme of Cricket Studies in America, the study of British imperialism from 1840 to 1926. And cricket in America is something which I certainly didn't know existed. During her studies, Belinda developed a love of heritage, completing both a major in history and heritage studies as an undergraduate before subsequently undertaking her master's museum studies, all with the University of Sydney. This led to her role as assistant curator at the Bradman Museum in Barrel. Belinda served in this position for 5 years, where she led research and the curatorial team, most notably for the museum's first ever external exhibition, which was hosted by the Canberra Museum and Gallery to coincide with the 2015 Cricket World Cup. Belinda also broke ground by producing the first ever concise list of state and national Australian cricketers to serve their country in wartime for the museum's Cricket During War tribute. This exhibition featured photographs of cricket being played by soldiers during wartime and told the history of many cricketers, both famous and not so famous, who left Australian shores to join the war effort. In 2015, Belinda accepted the position at the Museum of Fire as our Senior Heritage and Research Officer. In this position, Belinda oversaw the fire research for Fire and Rescue New South Wales Heritage Program, and also produced over 30 historical works which have been featured by Fire and Rescue New South Wales at their normal formal events, which are attended by the Commissioner and the Minister, and even on occasion the Governor. In 2019, Belinda assumed the role of Heritage and Assets Manager for the Australian Society of Anaesthetists and curator of the library and their archives. In May 2020, following the sudden death of our CEO, Mr. Mark White, AFSM, Belinda returned to the museum to serve as our interim CEO. Since assuming the position, Belinda has overseen the reopening of the museum following the forced COVID-19 closures and is leading the rebuilding process. The museum has been certified as COVID safe. However, due to the constant changing climate surrounding COVID-19, Belinda is at the forefront of constantly evolving the situation and has implemented a number of new and innovative strategies to engage both the public and the museum's heritage partner, Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Without any more further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Belinda.
Thank you, Peter. Before I begin, I also just want to make mention of Mark, but especially Mark's family. I actually worked with Mark for 4.5 years, and in that time we were the greatest of friends. But quite often we find ourselves on opposite sides of a conversation as well. But it was when we were on opposite sides that we produced our greatest work. I, of course, would never tell him that because he liked to always be right, as did I, so we both couldn't be right at the same time. However, that was when our best work was produced. Mark always told me that he did want me to one day be CEO. However, that's not something that I saw on my radar. Mark's up there now with a stupid smirk on his face saying, "See what I had to do to get you to come back to the museum?" So thank you for that, Mark. And having Mark's family here today, especially given it is Father's Day, and to be honest, we didn't know it was Father's Day when we scheduled this event, it really means a lot to me. Mark's family have been an incredible support for myself over the last few months. While I felt that I should have been supporting them, they've actually been supporting me. So for that, I say thank you very much. Now to the topic at hand, which is, what is history good for? Well, obviously, to start off with, history is what keeps me employed every day. And the great thing about history is that it's always going to be being created, which means that hopefully I will always be employed. Having said that though, for a young history student out there or for a struggling history professional, they'll be the first to tell you how few jobs there actually are for a professional historian. It's ironic though, isn't it? This is one of the largest academic topics out there. It's one of the largest creating topics. It happens every single day. Yet there are only a handful of professional jobs actually out there that are protecting the world's heritage. With that in mind, I'm thankful every single day for the role that I get to play. Now, as the CEO of the museum, I very rarely get asked, so what is it that you actually do every day? When I was a curator though, almost every single day, someone said to me, and what is it that you do? And is there actually enough work to keep you employed 5 days a week? Which, if you're in the field, is quite an ironic question, but if you're not, I guess it's kind of hard to understand what a curator actually does. Curators are a museum's unsung heroes. They often shy away from the limelight, and they tend to work in parts of the museum that are rarely seen by the public. They care for the museum's collection, of which generally 80% is in storage. Yes, just because you donate something to a museum does not mean that you're going to see it on display all the time. Excuse me. What you see in a museum doesn't just come together like magic. It comes together with a team and a lot of effort, and that's where the curators come in. Having said that, I would like to take a moment to pay tribute to our small team here. The Museum of Fire is actually classed as a small to medium-sized museum, but if you've seen the size of our building, which is actually up on the screen there, which was a former power station, so you can imagine how large the building is if you haven't been here before. If you see the size of our building, the size of our collection, and the way that we preserve firefighting history, then you'll see that we absolutely punch above our weight. And for that, I thank my team every day. I probably don't say it enough, so thank you to my team. Why then does our team go above and beyond every single day? Everyone here believes in the purpose of the museum. They believe in what we're trying to do, which is to preserve history. On the back of that then, let's answer the question, what is history good for? And in the case of not just the museum, but also on behalf of Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the answer is everything. One of the lesser known activities of the museum is that we are the heritage partner to Fire and Rescue New South Wales. We take care of the brigade's movable heritage. So most commonly that's things like vehicles, so fire engines, bells, anything that moves, including, and it does happen more often than you think, billiard tables. So there's all little things like that we help the brigade take care of every single day. We preserve the history of both the brigade and general firefighting history across not just New South Wales, but Australia and the world over. You can ask the question, what role does history play for an emergency service organisation whose priority should be on focusing on the preservation of life? I've worked with Fire and Rescue New South Wales for 5 years. And I have never worked with an organisation that is so proud of their history. Whether you're at the #1 City of Sydney Fire Station, which is where many people will claim the history of the brigade begins, spoiler alert, it's not. Join us next weekend for our digital event and you'll find out more about that one, so I won't digress about that now. But if you are in the city at #1 City Sydney Fire Station, or you're in the middle of New South Wales in a country station, you will find members of the brigade that are incredibly proud of their history, and they're proud to be part of an organisation that has such a long history. As part of our role as Heritage Partner to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, we complete history books and historic research for every single station opening, station centenary, brigade centenary, and any other formal event. To be honest, I never really questioned our presence at these events. It's very easy to understand if we're at a centenary, why the museum is there and why the museum is involved sharing that history. However, when it comes to a new station opening, I had never thought, well, why is the museum there? Why are we preserving this history? Recently, we were in Parks for the opening of the new station there. And one of the topics that came up was how strong the brigade felt about their history. It's one of the oldest brigades in rural New South Wales, dating back to 1878. And it's not just the brigade that's proud of that history, but it's the local community. What was brought to my attention when we were there was that by having the museum involved and by making sure the history is highlighted, is the fact that that history continues on. It's not forgotten. Just because you might be in a brand new station does not mean that the history is lost. It presents a continuation. In many ways, this is how the museum is the keeper of the history. It's our role to assist Fire and Rescue New South Wales as a whole, but also the individual brigades in preserving their history. History happens every day. So while most people just think of it as old stuff, here at the museum we obviously don't. What is current today is going to be old in 20 years' time. But if we don't collect it today, it may not be around when it's actually considered old and worthy of a museum. For example, if you have a look at the current firefighting uniform, I'm sure not a single firefighter thinks that worthy of being in a museum. But if you walk around our museum, you will actually find one item on display, and that is the current firefighting uniform. Let's imagine that that uniform changes in a few years' time. Every single item is destroyed, lost, and basically gone. How lucky isn't it then that we have one example at the museum to preserve that portion of history? If everything's gone, but the museum is still around, we will be preserving that history that otherwise would have been lost. This is the museum's role in preserving the history of firefighting. So, what is history good for? One of my favourite quotes is, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." This seems simple enough, but it takes some pretty special people to ensure the history is preserved. Our displays here at the museum may not be as modern as we'd like, but bit by bit and grant by grant, we are updating what we can. The best way you can support the museum is by coming to visit. So if you haven't yet visited, or if it's maybe been a while since you visited, I urge you to please come and visit us again. When we discussed hosting this event, we weren't sure what the response was going to be from the public. And I have to say that personally, I've been overwhelmed by the positive response from everybody, as well as Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Thank you to everyone who has been supporting us and for who continue to support us. And hopefully this will set a standard for things to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda. Our first presenter this morning, and as I alluded to earlier, because of the COVID-19 restrictions, we're limited to the number of people who can actually physically be here in the theatre out with us this morning. And such is the case of our first presenter, Station Officer Ian Grunwood, AFSM. Ian is going to give a presentation on military history in Fire and Rescue New South Wales and aspects of the research he did in compiling a very extensive history of our World War I veterans. The presentation will be live streamed So at this point, I'll hand over to our technicians, and we welcome Ian.
Good day, and let me say what an honour it is to be asked to present at this year's History Week event, which is part of the Museum of Fire's contribution. Well, history, what is it good for? This question is always worth asking, but in these current times, the question is debatable from so many angles. There are groups out there that want to wipe history from all discussion, who want to rewrite history, while refusing to take on any of its lessons. But are they actually mimicking some of the darkest parts of the 20th century? This question must be asked also. Fortunately, I see the question as a positive one. I hope by the end of this presentation, doubters will be convinced to think again. To give a bit of a background to my specific historical interests, they centre around military history, which I attribute to my maternal grandparents, where my grandmother captured my attention after showing me her father's Queen South Africa medal, which he earned for service in the Boer War at the beginning of the 20th century in South Africa with the New South Wales Mounted Rifles. And my grandfather, who was a career soldier, enlisted in 1937 and retiring in 1974 after active service in New Guinea during World War II. So this lifelong interest became more of a passion after joining the New South Wales Fire Brigade in 1992, where I discovered an avenue of research that was relatively untouched. And this centred around the honour roll found in the City of Sydney Fire Station with its 300 plus names listed. And I realised that for years firefighters had walked past the honour roll through the engine bay without knowing anything about the men who were listed on it, what they had achieved and what they had endured. And there's many, many fine stories amongst those 300 plus men. We of course knew they had served during World War I, but could only draw on knowledge we learned at school and grainy black and white film footage that we'd seen on TV to have any kind of appreciation of what they'd experienced. That really was about it. Because World War I veterans pretty thin on the ground even when I was growing up. So I decided to do something about this gap in knowledge and was determined to flesh out those names with what information I could find. With the advent of the internet and access to service records and other historical documents, the time was right to do some work and raise the awareness of these men. Despite this appearing to be a purely academic pursuit, I've come to realise that learning about these men and their accomplishments, their interactions with the department, and the impact of war on all aspects of life, light has been shed and new understandings on how the future unfolded and was influenced for not only those that served during the war, but also for the generations to follow who would serve the New South Wales Fire Brigade. So I see the passing down of family stories is a child's first exposure to history. There's a sort of initiation into the world that went before them, a world which is so influential on their future. This provides a connection to their family and provides answers to where they've come from and maybe to where they're headed. And so this leads me to what I describe as the pillars of history. These are the aspects of history that have such a big influence on our lives. So I have number one, our foundation. These are the initial histories one learns and can be on any number of levels, be it from family, as mentioned previously, or from joining a club, be it sporting or otherwise, or from starting employment in an organisation, for example, for myself, the Fire Brigade. The foundations begin with each new experience in life, as there's new histories to be learned. The histories of the family, club or organisation influence the culture, behaviour and attitudes of all people who are part of that group. They are the foundations that allow knowledge to expand. It's a starting point. You hear about past triumphs, tragedies, personalities, which can establish an expectation of how things are done or not done in the general running of the group. These foundations can be a source of great pride, being a family war hero, a great victory on the rugby field, or a dangerous incident dealt with efficiently and safely. The lessons learned from each of these aspects is important in our development. The old saying of those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it is directly applicable to those who ignore the foundations of their histories. So I have number two is experience. The study of history is so important in the passing on of experience. Being able to learn from those who have gone before us of their mistakes and successes can make the path we travel so much smoother. And a great example of this is someone I researched from the Fire Brigade. I purchased this long service in good conduct medal, which you can see there. I purchased it and I put it in a drawer for about 12 months. And I finally pulled it out and started looking around for information on the fellow. His name is Ronald Jenkins. Now, he was a World War II Army veteran, and in my research process, I looked at the book A Century of Fire, it's a history of the Fire Brigade, and in the index I found Jenkins' name. And that was a great surprise to me, and it was a great awakening. So I read on and I discovered that he'd actually died on duty at a fire in a substation in Napoleon Street and the Rocks in Sydney on the 20th of July 1963. Now, he'd only become eligible for this medal in the April of 1963. So he'd only just received his medal. Here's a picture of him here in his army uniform. And here's a picture of him in his Fire Brigade uniform. Through my research and with the assistance of the Museum of Fire, I actually got in contact with a relative of his, and they provided me with some pictures of him. So he died on this on the 20th of July 1963, as stated, and his death was put down to carbon monoxide poisoning. But when they inspected his equipment, there was no faults in the equipment at all. So consequently, a definite cause was never found, and this caused a lot of grief within the Fire Brigade. Many accusations were thrown around, but the end result was Jenkins' tragic death had far-reaching impacts on the New South Wales Fire Brigade, being a catalyst for the purchase of new equipment and improved training, which in turn has made the occupation of entering dangerous atmospheres, which firefighters do every day of the week, made that safer for the generations of firefighters who were the fire. So it's from this tragic experience, such as Jenkins' untimely death, that firefighters had an improved and safer working environment. Unfortunately, it was always going to take an event such as a death, such as Jenkins, for the motivation to be put in place for all these improvements to be made. So the purchase and subsequent research of the medal has allowed a small part of Ronald Jenkins' story to be told, and for him to be remembered and honoured for his contribution in times of war and peace. Just remember, there's no better teacher than experience. Jenkins' experience, fatal though it was, has improved the lives of others. So from here we go on to wisdom. History is summed up well by the words of Winston Churchill, who is quoted as saying, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." And that is so true when it comes to history. These wise words exemplify the value of history and its contribution to the progress of humankind. Through history, we have seen destructive acts such as the burning of books and the destruction of memorials that record persons and events. These acts only diminish ourselves as humans and eradicate the possibility of promoting reasoned discussion as to their real place in history. These behaviours destroy wisdom. The study of history breeds wisdom, and this is tied in with experiences that are recorded in a book, statue or memorial. They allow future generations to learn. They inspire these generations to learn, and from there they can make their own opinions and decisions. After World War I, the Fire Brigade agreed to re-employ and employ returned veterans. In all, 287 veterans were taken on the strength of the New South Wales Fire Brigades. These men had seen and experienced so much, had so much to offer post-World War I, the post-World War I Brigade. The experience of high stress, leadership, immediate action and man management were invaluable to a progressive fire brigade. And I've got this fantastic photo here that was supplied again by the Museum of Fire, which shows some kind of function or celebration at the old headquarters fire station in Castle Row Street, it's now called the City of Sydney. And when you look closely, the majority of these fellows have their medal ribbons on it. So it's a big gathering of World War I veterans. It could quite possibly be the unveiling of the honour roll, which is found at headquarters there. But I'm just not quite sure. But it's a great photo. And that photo is a photo of experience. They brought wisdom, these men brought wisdom to the table, learned from their own histories. Again, what is history good for? Fortunately, fire and rescue to this day employs a significant number of contemporary veterans and has serving members who deploy in active service with the ADF, who have returned and contributed their wisdom and experience to their service with Fire and Rescue New South Wales. So next I go on to direction. An organisation, or for that matter a nation, needs to know the direction it is heading. Be this a dynamic society and economy, or one that needs stimulation to improve the well-being and standards of living of its people. Studying and being aware of the history of an organisation or country ensures, in theory at least, that a positive path is being taken. To know its history, an organisation can appreciate its own culture and retain the positives and amend the negative aspects of that culture. When we look back and appraise the support given to the returned veterans of World War I, we see that the brigade honoured their contribution by maintaining their employment and honouring their service with the establishment of the honour roll. We see that the brigade set a positive example and established a direction for the future that engendered respect within the organisation in which defined its culture. The reinforcement of what was created in the trenches, loyalty, support, mateship and diligence absorbed into the fire brigade. This respect set in motion a direction for future generations to maintain and build on. I suppose the work I've done in researching these World War I veterans is part of that enduring direction and pathway set down over 100 years ago. By reassessing our attitudes and past achievements, policy and procedures can be tuned to provide direction for the future. The study of the past is the only way this can be achieved. Inspiration. Importantly, the study of history and its characters can provide inspiration to achieve and overcome obstacles that present themselves in daily life. It allows us to learn from others and proceed accordingly. An example of this is John Stutz. And there's John Stutz in this picture there. John Stutz was 26 when he joined the New South Wales Fire Brigade and had been an international rugby league representative who had played for SSO in the first rugby league game in Australia and who had played professionally in Britain during 1909-10. In 1914, John Stutz was granted life membership of the New South Wales Rugby League. So the New South Wales Rugby League had only been going for 8 years. This high achiever was a life member already. Stutz answered the call to arms and enlisted on the 3rd of March 1916, being allotted to the 17th Infantry Battalion. On the 3rd of May 1917, Stutz was killed in action in the Battle of the 2nd Bullet Court, a battle that was to claim 296 of his 17th Battalion comrades killed also. For a young man who achieved so much and with so much life in front of him, his sacrifice shows he put his country and family above all else. Major characters from history continue to inspire long after they have passed away. Nancy Wake, Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, Emmeline Pankhurst, Terry Fox are just several names that by their mere mention are inspiration. The study of their achievements bring history to life and their influence is still being felt today. History shows us that no matter how bad things may seem, for example 2020 and it stinks, there is also better days ahead. The study and appreciation of history promotes and energises improvement. In finishing, I'd like to leave you with this thought. History lays the foundation. History displays experience. History breeds wisdom. History gives direction. History provides inspiration. History, what is it good for? History is good for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Good day, and let me...
As I said, thank you, Ian. Our next presenter is Station Officer David Tye. David is a Station Officer with Fire and Rescue New South Wales. He was born in Paddington, New South Wales in 1966, still only a baby, and spent much of his early childhood growing up in the inner west of Sydney before moving with his family to the west, where he still now maintains his home. David was appointed as a permanent firefighter on the 1st of August 1986. He served at a number of fire stations across Sydney as a firefighter, most notably being Stanmore, which in fact was our oldest fire station, opening 6 months before Sydney Fire Station. Then Lidcombe, City of Sydney Fire Station, Penrith, St Mary's and Parramatta. In 1997, David was promoted to the rank of Station Officer and served as a relieving officer, which is the custom in Fire and Rescue New South Wales, before getting his own appointment, which is his own station. During the Sydney Olympics, David was one of 4 station officers drafted into the Structural Fire Safety Unit, so we could free up inspectors who were needed to return to full operations within the defined Olympic precincts whilst the Games are in progress. During his career, David has been awarded a unit commendation for meritorious service for the actions of his station in rescuing and resuscitating a person at a major unit fire, and he's been awarded an individual commendation for meritorious service for his efforts in researching and producing the book Learning from the Front, which is a biographical history of the chief officers and commissioners from the beginning, 1884, to Commissioner Greg Mullins. So David is currently the station commander of Cranbrook Fire Station, Seaperton. So we'll now move over and we will do this Parkinson style, and I'll ask him a number of questions. And at the end, as with Ian, those tuning in will be able to ask questions as well. Okay, David, how are you this morning?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. So what sparked your interest in history in the first place?
I've always been interested in political history, but I think actually doing this book really sparked my interest in history. As I was saying to you before, the very first moment I realised that this was a really important project was I was at State Records, and at State Records, when you get out the old folders with all the old reports, you've got to put the gloves on and all that sort of stuff. So I was turning over the pages, and I realised that I'd come across a report that Alfred Webb, who was our second chief officer, he'd written, and the paper was near see-through, but it felt so, sorry, a bit of an echo there, but felt so incredible that, you know, here I was looking at this report that one of our chiefs had written like over 100 years ago. That's when I really felt privileged to be doing it. Then just looking at the old photos, searching through the old photos with Brian, because Mark White had actually, he fully supported this project the whole way through. So, I'll move forward, maybe the echo will stop. When I was searching through the photos with Brian, we came across all these old photos because this was prior to all the photos being digitalised. So a lot of the photos were in old boxes and all sorts of stuff, and we came across one photo of Ray Barber, and it didn't actually identify him as Ray Barber, it just had a date from 1967, and it was a picture of him in full firefighting uniform, chief officer uniform, getting thrown up on a cat chute, and there was no name to it, but I identified it was him straight away, and then I looked at the date and I realised it was his last day, it was the day he retired. It was just such an incredible photo that I knew that we had to use that in the book. And there was another image, was a Thomas Nance, it was a situation, he was gardening at the back of headquarters, and every photo I'd sent off up to that date, the chiefs were all just posing for photos, but because it was such an unscripted photo, I guess, that was another image we had to get. But just one last thing, sorry. The last thing that really pushed my interest towards the history was some of the interviews, and most importantly, the interview I had with Vic Crum. Now, you probably don't realise, but Vic Crum was a superintendent in the brigade. He retired in 1970, and in 2011 he turned 100 years old, and I went to interview him for the book, but instead of getting information about the chiefs, I actually learned more about him. It was like stepping into a time machine, because he was still so sharp and 100. He was able to tell me everything he did from the time he started in 1933 right through. It was just an incredible experience. Thanks.
So, how did you go about your research? What was your methodology?
For the research, I think I did what everyone does, and I switched on to Google straight away, and of course there was nothing there. So what happened was then I got permission from Kathy Rostron, who's the records officer, to go to State Records. So I went to State Records and started pulling out all the files, and I realised what a mammoth job this was going to be. But went to State Records, went to State Library, the Fire Brigade Library I ended up getting heaps of information from. And that was just from the written material. From the actual pictures, we had to contact News Corp, Fairfax Media, Bauer Media, because none of the images from the 50s to the 80s were actually brigade photos. All the decent images were all newspaper images, so we had to actually purchase all those photos because we had to get copyright permission. So.
Of all the chiefs and commissioners, is there anyone in particular that you believe was particularly instrumental in shaping the brigades into what it is today?
No, I'd say they all had equal importance, because you can't really differentiate what one leader did to the next leader. I mean, you go back and look at Alfred Webb and Nicholas Sparks. Alfred Webb was our second chief, Nicholas Sparks was our third chief, and they're credited a lot with introducing training, introducing discipline, introducing in orders, motorised equipment. And yet you go back to our first chief, William Douglas Bear, and he had the situation where he had to unify the insurance brigade members and volunteer brigade members, who there were a lot of animosity between the two, and he actually unified them to form a functioning fire brigade. So how do you discredit what he did compared to the next one? And then you look at when permanent female firefighters started in 1985, that under Chief Officer Roy Ahern. Yet Chief Officer Rex Threlfo before him, he had been really a strong advocate of females joining the permanent staff. And then we go to Mr. Mullins, who in 2015 made a 50-50 recruitment drive. And then, just one other point, Commissioner McDougall, he introduced a lot of technology to the brigade. Prior to him, we didn't even have computers or fax machines in the fire station. So I'd say all the commissioners and chief officers have played a role in shaping the brigade.
If you could go back in time and have a conversation with one of them, who would it be and why?
Once again, I'm going to have to sit on the fence and just say that I'd like to actually interview all of them. I'd bring my recorder. When I interviewed the relatives or the senior officers, I just basically put my recorder on the table, and then I just ask them some open-ended questions and just go from there. You look like, one person in particular, Viv Lowther. There's a story in the book where I talk about how the day Buckingham's fire started. And Buckingham's fire started on Anzac Day 1968. And what had happened was the fire started, and Mr. Lowther was out in lawn bowls, and there was a phone call to his house. So his wife has picked up the phone, and there was no mobile phones obviously in those days. So she's run up to John, the son, and said, "Quick, go get Dad. The watchroom's called." So John's jumped on his bike, ridden like crazy to get to the lawn bowls, and yelled out to his dad, "Dad, the watchroom wants you." So Mr. Lowther has gone into there, found out that the big fire was on. He's run back home because he didn't have his car with him, got dressed in the driveway, and then flew off to the fire. But it'd be interesting just to find out his observations. All right, once you got to the fire, what did you see? how long was it before the wall came down? Just things that no one really knows. I mean, you've got other chiefs like E.J. Griffiths. E.J. Griffiths was a first grade football player. He played for Eastern Suburbs from 1909 and played in their premiership winning side in 1911, played in their 1912 premiership winning side. So, and then he was one of the original Anzacs at Fort Overseas. So he had an incredible life. There's so many. Essentially, like I said, I'd like to interview all of them. I mean, and the one I really regret not interviewing now is Commissioner McDougall, because, like, sadly, Mr. McDougall passed away just this July, and he was always happy for other officers such as Mr. Stathis and Mr. Dobson to actually talk about him. He didn't really want to blow his own trumpet, but it would have been nice to actually to have a interview him about his life.
Are there any other aspects of history about fire and rescue in New South Wales that you'd like to research?
I'd obviously like to do more research. I really enjoy doing the research aspect of it, but there hasn't been really any other avenues come up. Like, I looked at a few bigger fires, but there's nothing really that I've come across.
Now, for any young up-and-coming historians, are there any tips you'd like to give them for someone who's thinking of researching something, particularly into our service?
No, I guess you've just got to put a lot of hours in. You've got to know what to look for. Like, obviously, state records at Kingswood, state library. For me, it was a fire brigade issue, so I went to the fire brigade library. But Trove is an excellent resource. You're just basically looking at the old newspapers. It's just a lot of time. And if like this project, if I did it again, I'd probably try and get someone else to assist me with the research as well. But at the end, when we had the working team, that was an incredible resource where we had like Andrew Parsons, Malcolm Allen, Michelle Bowers, and Peter Walker, who basically carried a lot of the workload at the end to help get that book to fruition.
And just to wrap up, what do you see is the importance of history?
I think for all organisations, they need to know where they originated. I mean, you look at the fire brigade. We started in 1884, and we started with 1 horse, 3 steam engines, a quantity of leather hose of varying degree, and 24 men. That was essentially, that's all we had. And it's important to know that, because when you look at where we are now, 2020, it's incredible how far we've come and how far we've improved. And I just think it's important for everyone to know where we started, what humble beginnings we actually had. So.
Very good. Now stay there, and I'd like to invite Belinda back at this point for some questions and answers.
Okay. First of all, for Belinda, what has been the highlight of your career in history to date, and why? The highlight of my history career. Oh, my career in history. I might give a cop-out answer and say probably becoming CEO. I think every history professional out there has really great ideas and has a lot that they want to do. And to be honest, it pays to be the boss, because you actually get to do them. So I'm going to say that.
Do you have any advice for those seeking to pursue a career in history?
Take every opportunity that comes your way. It may be serving front of house at a museum. You may get a job, say working at reception. Anything you can do to get your foot in the door. Volunteer everywhere. Museums exist on volunteerism. Here at the museum, we rely heavily on our volunteers. So basically just do anything you can to get your foot in that door.
Now a question relating to the museum. What is your favourite item in the collection?
probably have two. So the first would be the crane that we have here. The crane, we can put a photo up afterwards. It's actually one of the rarer appliances out there. It's obviously not thought of as being it's not necessarily thought of being as a fire engine. It's a crane that literally moves items from one place to another. When it came to the museum, it was in an absolutely terrible condition. It was rusted out. It had been sitting in a paddock for years. I think it had actually found its way down to Victoria. There were only 5 created, and this is the only one that has been restored to its state that it's in. Our volunteers absolutely made it look magical, and the museum received a Heritage Award for it. So for that reason, I really like that item because it shows just what we can do as a team. And the other item that I quite often talk about, I know when I take people around the museum, is the old canteen. The canteen was actually, the money was raised by the Women's Fire Auxiliary, which is a group that is sort of underrepresented, and it's a different kind of item again. So I guess the 2 items I like the most are the 2 that probably are not fire engines.
As a lead on from that, David spoke about females within the brigade and that they weren't admitted until 1985. As a museum, how do we reflect this?
So, as I just mentioned, the Women's Fire Auxiliary actually played a major role. So the Women's Fire Auxiliary existed during World War II. They didn't attend fires like the rest of the brigade, who obviously were men, but they did play a major role in manning the stations overnight. They were the next line of defence should there be an invasion. The AO also then obviously raised funds and they helped out in that manner. So the Women's Fire Auxiliary, and women are represented in the museum pre-1985, but it's during the wartime era. Once the war was over, the Women's Fire Auxiliary basically ceased to exist, and then we don't get women entering the brigade until 1985. When the museum was created in the late 1980s, obviously women were only a new addition to the brigade. As I mentioned before when I was talking, the museum hasn't really changed dramatically since it was opened in the 1980s. So I think in that regard, women are not necessarily represented because at the time the museum was opened, they were still only just starting out. So going forward, hopefully we can represent the change a little bit better.
Thanks, Belinda. We do have a few questions for Ian, who's unable to join us, so we'll do that later. Now on to David. Where is the best place to go to start historic research if a local fire station wants to start compiling their history?
That's probably a question that Belinda would answer better than I would, because like I really haven't done site specific for a certain station. Mine's been just overall sort of research. Yeah, you can answer that one.
First step is to visit Trove. So as David said before, Trove's an amazing resource. It has every generally published newspaper up until the 1950s. Not everyone, but it does have a lot that you'll get the information that you need. Obviously, newspaper articles are a great source of information because technically they are primary resources because they were written at the time. They're obviously written with bias, but most historic sources do have some sort of bias in them. So if you have someone at your station who's super keen and likes to sit in front of a computer for hours on end, then they can go down that rabbit hole. The other option, and whilst I don't want to create more work for the museum, is to approach the museum. We are the Heritage Partner to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, and we hold the Historic Archive here. Having said that, we obviously get inundated with requests for information on a regular basis. So we will always prioritise the events sanctioned by the Office of the Commissioner, which are the station centenaries, the station openings, and then after that we try and help everybody else out as best we can. But if you do approach us, we can generally point you in the right direction and tell you where to go. I mean that in the best way.
Okay, again for David, photographs undoubtedly form an important part of your research. Do you think the right picture is really worth 1,000 words?
Yeah, unquestionably. But what happened with our first draft of the book, we realised that we had no firefighting photos in it because we'd done the draft and they were all just pictures of chief officers standing at attention waiting to get their photo taken. So I went up to Mal Cannellan at the time and said, sir, could we somehow purchase these photos? Because what I learned quickly from doing the research was that after the 1st of January 1955, you have to have copyright permission to utilise any of these photos. So the only decent photos were newspaper photos, and we had to purchase all those. And Mr. Kennellan said to me, look, it's pointless us having this expensive bed and then going and buying cheap pillows. He goes, just go and buy what you need. And that was brilliant, because then I probably went overboard, because then I started going through everything. But we did need good photos, and we ended up getting some great photos, like photos that probably no one has seen. Like even the image that we've got in the book of Granville, like we've got, I found actually a better image where a fiery was sitting on top of the roof looking in, but we couldn't work out who owned the copyright to that. So, but we got one that was probably just as good with a number of firefighters in the image. But yeah, so did that answer the question?
Definitely, that's perfect. So that's all of the questions I have today. I thought I may open it to the audience, just in case anyone had questions. No? Okay. No, that concludes.
Can I ask a genuine question?
Oh, absolutely.
One thing that wasn't asked when you were getting interviewed by Peter is, why did you decide to write the book?
It didn't actually start out as being a book. It actually started out as being an off-the-cuff remark I made to the Commissioner. We were walking together on level 10 down the hallway, and he actually said to me, he said, oh, when did you start up here? Because I was helping in lessons learned at the time. And I said, February 18th, sir. And he goes, oh, you know the date you started, that's not a good sign. And I'm going, oh, no. So we were walking along in silence, and then I said to him, so it's really sad how we've got all the photos of the chiefs up at the training college, and no one seems to know anything about them at all. I said, well, it'd be good if we just even had one page of information on each chief on our intranet site, so there's some semblance of history there. And he goes, great idea, David, and then just walked away. And I was going, oh, what's just happened there? So then I went back and talked to my manager at the time, who was Chris Sedgwick, and just said, I explained to him what was going on. He said, that sounds like a great project, David, but if you're going to do it about the Chiefs, you have to do a good job. And, which he was correct. So I started compiling information, started doing basic writing, but the concept of a book didn't really come around until I talked to Andrew Parsons. Now, Andrew Parsons was our Assistant Director of Media, and I was talking to him about what I was doing, and he said, that sounds like that'd be a great idea for a book, talking about all 21 Chiefs. And I thought he was being a bit flippant initially, but then he came back and said, no, let's do it. And so that's when he got me in contact with an editor like Robin Lloyd. And Robin Lloyd was his English master when he was at school. And so I was sending her all the initial drafts of the profiles I was writing on each chief, and she was sending back with big red marks through everything, going, no, that's not right. And it took me a while, but she really taught me what to do, and how to reference properly, and so it took me a long time to get through. But yeah, that was the initial point, and then it was the situation. Sorry to expand on the answer, but I'd written the 21 profiles, because what I did, put all the information in 21 folders, and I just slowly wrote everyone's profile. But then it got to a situation where Julianne Ahern invited me to her house so I could interview Roy Ahern. Now, Roy Ahern was the 15th chief, I'm going to say, or 16th. I'm going off memory there. And I spoke to him, and he gave me some great stories. And then Julianne gave me great stories as well, so I added them to the profile. But then suddenly I had one profile with all these personal stories and 20 with none. And so I thought, what am I going to do here? Because I knew it was going to be a massive job to actually write down personal stories for all of them, but I thought if I was going to do a proper job, I had to do that. So then I had to start trying to find the relatives of all these chiefs, and what I wanted to do was actually get the first-hand stories of these chiefs. I did want to get the stories that were passed down from generation to generation, because those sort of stories, as nice as they are, they seem to gather a life of their own. So basically, from the 6th chief on, which is George Grimman, I actually interviewed his grandson, who was also named George Grimman, and he was like 80 years old, George, but George Grimman, the chief officer, had come to live with George's family, later in life, and so George actually knew him, so I was able to write his stories, and then from each chief onwards, I was able to find relatives, and just finding the relatives was a massive task, because what I had to do was go to state library, find the funeral notice of the actual chief, go down and find who his children were, and then essentially try and locate them. Now, for the male descendants, it was easy, but for the female descendants, what I had to do, provided it was long enough ago, I went to birth deaths and marriages, found out who that lady married, if they married. Then I went to Ryson Index, because the Ryson Index is essentially a funeral notice, to see if that person was still alive. And then it was a situation of trying to actually locate that person. I mean, the very first chief we had was William Douglas Baird. I actually found his great-great-grandson, John Matz, and that took me like a month of full-on research. And I actually, when I found him, it was just incredible. Because I can remember calling him and saying, I was telling him what I was doing, and I said, would you be related to William Douglas Baird? And he was saying, yeah, I'm his great-great-grandson. And I was like, wow, it was incredible that it actually located him. And then it seemed like I was able to do that with everyone. There was only one chief, E.J. Griffiths. Now, he had one son, and his son had passed away, and his son had one daughter, and her name was Kim, but I couldn't work out where or what her married name was, because the birth deaths and marriages only goes back 50 years, so due to the privacy laws, you can't actually work out who they got married to. So in the end, I actually sent a letter, because it got that desperate, I sent a letter to the Daily Telegraph, to the in search section, and saying, I'm searching for the granddaughter of E.J. Griffiths, blah, 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 and then I was explaining what I did. And it turned out that Doug Messenger, who was a superintendent, personnel superintendent, he'd retired by that time, but his wife was actually still in contact with Kim Sheridan. And then one day she just rings me up and says, oh, hi, E.J. Griffiths' granddaughter. And that was great, because then you made contact with her, and it was just, it seemed like that for nearly all of them. It was a long process to find the relatives, but once I found them, I basically got the little recorder out, recorded their stories, and that was another big process. Sorry, going on and on, but actually to make their stories actually seem like it was a flowing interview with them. People, I realised that once people start talking, they start remembering stuff that happened early, then they'll go back to something that happened just lately, and then they'll keep jumping through their relationship with that person. So what I did was, with the recorded information, I wrote down word for word what they'd said, and then I kept everything that I thought was really good. But then I had to spend hours putting it like a jigsaw puzzle, putting it in place so it all seemed like it was a flowing conversation. And I did that for every interview, and it's hopefully worked out. So I better stop there.
Thanks, David.
Nice.
Thanks, David. And also, thank you to all the presenters and those who have contributed to this morning's events. Now, as the heritage partner to Fire and Rescue New South Wales, the museum undertakes all the historical research for Fire and Rescue New South Wales. The museum only has a small heritage team, so without the dedication and efforts of other people, such as David, and individuals across New South Wales, a lot of the research would not be possible. In the past, the museum and Fire and Rescue New South Wales have informally recognised the efforts of these people. However, it's now the intention of both organisations to put some formality around that, and by way of a citation certificate, and also membership in the visitation of Friends of the Museum, which I will talk about shortly. The first people to receive these new citations will be firefighter Nathan Fitzsimmons, who assisted the museum in producing the history required at the recent opening of the South Tamworth Fire Station. Now, this saw the construction of a new fire station, and and which necessitated the move of West Tamworth Brigade, of which Nathan was a member, into the new building. Nathan put in extremely good effort to this, and he even kept popping into the museum here to ensure that what we were doing was meeting his needs. The second person who is going to receive a citation this year is Station Officer Matthew Jeffries. Matthew is the Station Commander of Orange Fire Station. Station Officer Jeffrey went above and beyond to provide content to the museum for a digital event which was being hosted here today, and he also assisted in researching and preserving the history of the Orange Brigade, and that's why we choose to recognise both those two people this year, and as I said earlier, we hope this becomes a regular feature. Neither of the two recipients know that they were going to receive anything, and because they can't be here today because of the COVID-19, we will arrange to ensure that they receive their citation and membership to the Friends of the Museum. Now, we've heard mentioned earlier today, and it'd be very remiss of us if we didn't mention Mark White. Mark was our former not only CEO, he was the executive chairman, so he was chair of the board and also CEO of the museum. And he's been at the forefront of heritage work from the earliest days of the museum. I personally first met Mark when the museum relocated its collection. They called it a museum, but it wasn't a museum, from Alexandria to our first move to one of the wharves on Sydney Harbour. And I met him there with his father, who were both very heavily involved with the Historical Fire Engine Association. While serving as the CEO, Mark remained an active firefighter and was committed to preserving the history of the brigades and the community that he served. And at the time of his passing, he was actually a firefighter based at St Mary's Fire Station, which is just down the road from the museum. He's dedicated to the service and community, was recognised for the award of the Australian Fire Service Medal, and then later his ongoing efforts were recognised for the award of a member of the Order of Australia. Without Mark's guidance and constant support, the Museum of Fire would not have developed into this magnificent facility that it is, and Mark's passion for the work of the museum and his dedication in assisting the community was second to none. And the board used to always worry that if anything was ever to happen to him, he'd be irreplaceable. And unfortunately, that occurred. But we now have Belinda. So on behalf of all the staff and volunteers at the museum, we wanted to use this as the opportunity to pay tribute to Mark and to say thanks for his guidance and support over the years. And we hope that he will rest in peace. In determining what we can do, the board made a decision, and much of the guidance was from Belinda, that we would launch a Friends of the Museum membership card, and at the conclusion of this event, we will open it up to people to join. And we thought it appropriate that all the cards will be numbered, and we thought it would be appropriate that the first number should go to Mark White. And we're pleased today to have Mrs. Liz White and her two boys with us. But rather than me do the presentation, I thought it appropriate, because Liz also worked at the museum, and the boys put many hours in here. They know Belinda well, so I thought I'd hand over and allow Belinda to take this opportunity to make the presentation. Belinda.
On behalf of the museum and the board, I'd like to present you with the certificate. Mark is number 1. You will be number 1 forever going forward.
Thank you.
And he's setting the standard for everyone else that will be make more good in a number of coming years. He is our first life member.
Thank you very much.
Well, that concludes this morning's events, but we do have a week of events, and you'll be able to log on and have a look on the museum's website. Most notably, next weekend, the Historical Fire Engine Association, and we have the president, Mr. Gerard Douglas, this morning, will be doing a display here at the museum, which will be open to the public to come and watch some of our vintage fire engines, actually still doing what they were designed to do. And that's at the dedication of Gerard and his association, and also our volunteers here. 90% of all the fire appliances, and it includes the horse-drawn stuff, is still in working order, and that's as a result of the efforts of the volunteers. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this morning's presentation, and as we said earlier, we look forward to this becoming a regular event at the start of each History Week. Thank you.